Good morning, friends. We are continuing now with our How to Work with People, the Art of Supportive Leadership. People, including ourselves, because the principles that involve here also are very beneficial for directing our own energy toward the goals that we set for ourselves. So let us start with a prayer and then we'll go on. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Master Paramahansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, dear friend Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Help us to feel your presence within us, your guiding light, taking us to where we need to be in order to be in harmony with your will. All things of this world are presented to us only for the opportunities they provide for us always to choose God alone. Help us always to be steadfast and clear as to where your truth lies, that we may walk according to your guidance in all that we do. Om. Peace. Amen. So, we're in a new chapter of this book. We used it simply for the title of this series, this session, which is called The Need for Action, Not Talk. What Swami has put into this book is the experience that he has had in developing Ananda and that I've had in being part of it. And he's just touching on all these major areas that I realize as I read through this book that have been so, that I have learned so deeply from experience that they're just self-evident to me in the way that I conduct myself in my leadership responsibilities. But so I can say with every single one, and this is a very important one, I know from experience that this is true. I didn't learn it in the book first. I learned it from constant experience, and then I see, oh, look, there it is. When Swami wrote this book, he wrote it exceedingly quickly because he'd had lifetimes of enlightened leadership. He had expressed lifetimes of enlightened leadership, and so therefore he just made an outline of what he'd been doing. So this is chapter 9. It's called The Need for Action, Not Talk. The newly elected officials of a formerly corrupt city government. This is a little vignette he's giving here, so I'll read the whole thing. The newly elected officials of a formerly corrupt city government were in a tizzy. We don't know what city, we don't know what the circumstances were, but it doesn't matter. It's just a little allegory. It seemed to them as though all their constituents had conflicting theories as to how the city government should be reorganized, and each was shouting for the acceptance of his own theories. "We can't possibly satisfy them all," cried the councillors in exasperation. "Never mind," said the new mayor, a man of experience. "All we need to do is give them a well-run government. If we do, their theories won't matter to them anymore." Such, in fact, proved to be the case. Once the citizens found the new tree of government bearing wholesome fruit, they no longer cared much how the tree was being watered. I'm going to pause for just a second. Swamiji would often, and this is a case in point, maybe there really was a corrupt city government and an experienced mayor, I don't know. I think it's an example merely that he made up, but maybe I'm wrong. But the point is, Swami would often say things of this type, which is that you don't always have to take people as they present themselves to you. Much of the time, what you want to ask is, what is it that is really important to these people? And they may have an idea of how their objective is going to be obtained, but much of the time, people's opinions are just that. They're just opinions. And when you sort of go deeper, if you have the opportunity to, and try to find out on what basis have they come to those opinions, why are they so adamant in defending them, much, or I dare say most of the time, you find that there's nothing really behind it. There's just conviction, but there's not really substance behind it, and there's rarely experience behind it. Even if there is substance, it's what I read, what I heard, what my Uncle Mort always said to me, whatever it might be. It's not really like well-reasoned. Now, when we were doing another book, the Money Magnetism book, and there was a phrase in there that has really been helpful to me, a sentence: muddy thinking and feeling leads to chaos. And it came in that book because Swami was talking about the principle of crystal clarity, which later has become a theme in the name of our publishing company and in various books that Swami has written. Crystal clarity, in other words, knowing why, knowing what your fixed opinion is based on. Now, it doesn't have to be based on, controlled data, scientific research, the placebo versus the other. It's not like that. Clarity can also be a clear intuition. So it's not like we're dooming ourselves to a super rational process, but we do need to be clear about what we're doing. Interestingly, I've been involved for a period of time in a complicated situation that is proving to be resolvable, but not easily resolvable. And each step of the way, when decisions have had to be made, I've found it necessary within myself to become extremely clear about what the actual issues are. And because if I clearly know what forces are playing against each other, then I can make a much more informed decision. Otherwise, my own emotions, my own feelings can assert themselves very strongly, too strongly, unless I can stand back and really clarify what's going on. So in this little story that Swami's telling us, all the citizens are shouting, but what they're really shouting for is, we want an honest government that works. And the mayor, in this case, who had experience, knew that he could make an honest government that worked, and that's what the people really wanted. So that's what we have to constantly be paying attention to, is the bottom line, so to speak. Even working with Swami Kriyananda, myself working with Swamiji, when I started asking, what is he trying to accomplish, I was able to understand much better the ideas that he was putting forth. And sometimes I was able to make a creative and helpful improvement on what he was suggesting that he would happily accept, because he could tell I was really trying to accomplish the same thing he was trying to accomplish. I wasn't just raising my voice with a contrary opinion. So the first premise of what Swami's trying to set up here in a chapter called, action, what is it called? The need for action, not talk, is to really try to feel why people are talking. I mean, whether or not they really have an intelligent idea to offer, or whether they're simply anxious about what the result's going to be, and are clinging to their own ways of doing it. Now, this man said, essentially, if we can finesse our way around having to answer each one of these individual objections, and just give them a well-run city, you'll find that everything will work out just right. And that's the beginning premise. Now, again, this is Swami's knowledge of human nature, which oftentimes, all the time, he had superior knowledge of human nature. And oftentimes I wasn't quite ready to believe him. Sometimes because, and the only word I can think of is it sounded too cynical to me. But Swami wasn't really cynical at all. He was cynical in the sense that he was just realistic. He just knew what people were like. He knew what human nature was like. He understood the psychology of the mass. I encountered some notes that I had made about, there was a time when Barack Obama was still president of the United States, and he gave some he was in the Mideast, and of course there was always such difficulty there, and he gave a very well-reasoned speech, very well thought out speech about how this side could do that and that side could do that and everything could be resolved. And Swami remarked that it was a very intelligent speech, but it didn't take into account at all the human element of it. It was purely intellectual. And as Swami said, he just doesn't understand the psychology of the mob, was the phrase I think Swami used, but meaning the mass psychology of people who become emotionally overwrought about things, which, to say the least, that's what is going on and has been going on for decades in that area. There's an enormous amount of mob psychology and emotional overwroughtness. So that's what this little allegory, too. There's a lot of emotional overwroughtness if you take the story as if it were true. They've been in a corrupt situation and they don't want to have another one. So they have a lot of intensity about it. But what they really want is an honest government. They're less wedded to their theories than they are to their result. So focus on their result. So anyway, Swami going on says, how often one finds debate only confusing issues instead of clarifying them. At such times, almost any action, this is one of my favorite lines in the book, at such times, almost any action is better than wasting further hours, weeks, or months arguing the best possible course. This is something I saw with Swamiji. This also has to do, we were talking in a few earlier sessions about the nature of perfection and the process that I had to go through in carrying out my responsibilities, where I had to realize that perfection is a positive flow of energy, and that too much obsession with small points and trying to make small points exactly as you want them, actually, in the idea that this will make the whole result better, often actually ruins the result because we have blocked the positive flow of energy. And so that's what Swami is talking about here. Sometimes debate is just, this is my opinion, this is your opinion, this is what I want my rights listened to. And again, this is what I was just said just now about sometimes there's a lack of clarity in that commitment. There's just the commitment without the clarity, or even without accountability. Lots of things happen. But when people get the microphone, they especially people who have not shown in their lives that they actually know how to accomplish. People who actually know how to accomplish have a sense of the balance between the perfection of the details, the need for debate. Swamiji was masterful at it. And he would close out the discussion and we would go forward with action. I believe he says it in here that energy has its own intelligence. And if you can keep the energy flowing, the details often sort themselves out, where if you just keep trying to refine those details by continual conversation, there's not enough new energy coming into the situation to magnetize a solution. You just end up going in circles. And that's why he said, at such times, almost any action is better than wasting further hours, weeks, or months arguing the best possible course of action. In my mind, I've repeated this sentence many times. I inserted a phrase, any action short of absolute foolishness is better than continued conversation. But Swami didn't say that. He said almost any action is better than further conversation, because you'll break the logjam and you'll bring new magnetism in. I was thinking about this it's not exactly the same, but it's similar. It's similar. When I started on the spiritual path, the coterie of friends, we all got involved together. And it was through the teachings of Ramakrishna, through his disciple Vivekananda. And over the course of a couple of years, I started learning about the spiritual path in 1966, and I met Swami in 1969. So there were approximately 3 years there. I became very deeply connected to Sri Ramakrishna, who was an avatar who actually died in India just almost at the same time that Master was born. So it was sort of and Master always had a tremendous high regard for Ramakrishna. Two of the chapters in Autobiography of a Yogi, one is about Master Mahashaya, who was a disciple of Ramakrishna, and one is about the place where Ramakrishna lived. So there was a very close association between them. But my heart was with Ramakrishna. Although I never took initiation or did anything like that, I never even thought about those things, and they weren't offered to me. But my connection with Ramakrishna was real and very important to me. So I meet Swami Kriyananda. My relationship with Kriyananda, with Swamiji, just came across like a tsunami over everything and became the definition of where my life was going to go. But he was a disciple of Yogananda, and I'd seen Autobiography of a Yogi. I even owned a copy, but I actually hadn't found it magnetic to read. I was very austere in my thinking, which did not include a lot of devotion or a lot of miracles. Well, devotion, I will take that back. It didn't include miracles. It just wasn't, and in Autobiography of a Yogi, on page 9 or page 11, Lahiri Mahashaya manifests in a wheat field. And it didn't resonate with me, so I closed the book. So then I meet Swami Kriyananda, about whom I have no questions, no doubts. And he's a disciple of Yogananda. So I go back and I read Autobiography of a Yogi, which suddenly seems like a wonderful book, and I can't comprehend why I didn't understand it before. I needed the magnetism of Swami to get that across. So then time passes, and I want to move to Ananda village. There's no question that that's what I'm going to do, and I do. But this question in my mind between Ramakrishna and Yogananda is still very vivid. And Swamiji, especially at that time, did not fulfill the same role. And therefore, I had to make some resolution. But how could I make a resolution? It's like I'm trying to decide, the question would be, who is my guru? And I don't know. Well, I knew then, and I even know even better now, I didn't know anything about what I was talking about. I could spin the words. I can still spin the words. But to me, even to this day, it's just a complete divine mystery. All of love is a divine mystery. I was thinking back on how, on experiences of love and loving that I've had in my life, and where does it come from? You know, and well, actually, now that I think about it, Swami wrote a song, didn't he? What is love? Is it only ours? Or is it love we touch in the flowers, he puts it. Then there's more verses, but it's just asking that question, what is love? Where does it come from? So, in a love relationship of divine love with the Guru, I was just, how did I know? But I knew I had to move to Ananda, and I knew that the context that I was moving into required me to make a choice, because it was a community of disciples of Master. But I couldn't make a choice. I didn't know how to. But I also knew that if I just sat there and waited for it to be clear, it would never become clear, because what I needed was intuition. And I didn't have intuition. I needed to develop intuition. And how could I develop intuition except by serious spiritual commitment and spiritual work? So I needed to move to Ananda. I needed to learn from Swami Kriyananda. I needed to throw myself into the life of the ashram if I was going to ever know whether I belonged in that ashram, whether Master was my guru. So I remember very consciously meditating and sort of visualizing Ramakrishna and Master in front of me, and I knew they didn't have any argument between them. They weren't in a contest to see who could get the most disciples, and God knows nobody was arguing over me. It was so, and I just said, in a very, very friendly way, I'm going to go learn from Swami Kriyananda, and I'm going to let you guys figure this out. And then I just put it out of my mind. It wasn't my issue anymore. I put it in their hands. And it was about a year. And the entire time I acted as if, and I put out a tremendous amount of energy because I was so happy to be there. About a year later, I literally just woke up in the morning and said, of course you belong to Yogananda. You know, everything about your life shows you that that's true. And I said, oh, okay. And that was the end of it. Now, that was not exactly what Swami's talking about here, but it is what he's talking about here. You can't really figure things out sometimes just by sitting there trying to figure them out. You literally, because there is no new energy coming into the situation. And that's what action is. Action is new energy. And when we take action, we change, the whole dynamic changes, and then all of a sudden, oh, we can see it from a new perspective. If we just keep coming back to the meeting room with pieces of paper, and everybody just keeps bringing their same brain and their same pieces of paper, the energy will die. So here's what Swami says. Planning that facilitates action may indeed save weeks of work. You know, if you're building a building or if you're doing anything, there's progressive stages. And if you don't know what those progressive stages are, it's very helpful to sit down and figure out that this is needed before this can be done, and this is needed before this can be done. Planning that facilitates action, supports action, not merely blocks it. Planning that facilitates action may indeed save weeks of work. But planning that shelves action indefinitely only discourages the flow of creative energy. Now see, these are aphorisms that you have to put in front of you. Is this planning facilitating action, or is this planning in lieu of action, putting all action on the shelf? And it says, a planning that shelves action indefinitely only discourages the flow of creative energy. So then you have to figure out again, what is perfection? Where does inspiration come from? What magnetizes success? Creative energy. Creative energy is the power that we have within us. I live in Silicon Valley, where a lot of creative energy just, it's in the water. It just flows. And in our building of the work of Ananda here, people have been it's like in the culture, there's a spirit of generosity with money. Of course, I'm talking in very broad strokes here, because people understand that wealth is, well, let me phrase it differently. The money that's here is the result of enormous creative energy. This is not like an old established aristocracy where the fifth generation is living off of the creative energy of great-great-great-great-grandfather. This is a place where people know where the money came from because they earned it, and they earned it yesterday. And that gives you a certain mindset, which is to say that my wealth may have manifested as money, but my wealth was the ability to create that money, which, in other words, creative energy. I remember when we were starting our school here, and that was like 30 years ago, our school for little children. And we had to persuade parents to give their children to our school, but we wouldn't have a school unless they gave us their children. And gradually I began to realize that parents have a natural protective attitude toward their children. And there was a certain reluctance. Fortunately, we had a master teacher, Barbara Rabin, who was so magnetic and so effective, and she was the founding teacher of our school. And the children just loved her. So the children would meet that teacher and think, whoa, if I could go to school with Barbara, and that helped move it along. I want to add that. But there was one wonderful interaction with this family, and they had a very lively girl who ended up going through our school all the way through to 8th grade, I believe, from pre-K, which is where she was then. Her father was an entrepreneur, and he himself had built at least one and maybe more companies. And when he confronted us about this, like, what are you really doing here? The one who was really one of the masterminds, David, of the school at the time, he just answered him very frankly, and basically just laid the whole thing out for what it was, why we thought we could pull it off, what the obstacles might be, where the money was going to come from, how we were going to deal with this. He just laid out an entrepreneur's story to him. And the guy immediately knew it would work and signed his kid up. And it was really interesting because he understood that we were very wealthy, and that even though there appeared to be no stability to what we were doing, if you looked at it from a certain angle, from another angle it had lots of stability, but he knew where it came from. That's creative energy. Now, you're the leader. I mean, we're talking here to leaders. If you're the leader, you have to make sure that the creative energy stays. You can't allow other people's desire to kill the project because of their misunderstanding. You can't allow that to rule. And you have to realize that that's a major threat. Just letting everybody talk until they're talked out is not necessarily going to give you anything at all. And it may drain the lifeblood out of what you're doing. Many a project has been started under such a burden of carefully detailed plans and weighty expectations that, like an overloaded plane, it never manages to get off the ground. I recently saw a very good documentary which is called Rescue? It's called Rescue. And it's a documentary about the young boys soccer team in Thailand that was taking a holiday inside this cave where they often explored the cave, and it was a playground for the children. It wasn't reckless to go in there, but there was an out of season, unexpected rainstorm, and during the monsoon season, the cave floods. So this was not the season, but there was an unseasonable weather change. This happened just a few years ago, so this is our climate change world. Suddenly they were trapped inside because there was a river running inside the cave. All of that. It's a great documentary. I highly recommend it. There was a certain point where the Thai government was involved, where these different entities were involved, and the only people who really knew how to rescue these children were a small group of cave divers who had been gathered from various countries of the world, and none of them were Thais, because the Thai Navy SEALs, who were extremely skilled, were not skilled in this weird, unique aspect, which is diving in a flooded cave. The world gets very specialized. So it's really coming down to it. The rains have started again. There's this open window to get these boys out. Just enormous amount of tension has been built. But everybody's just talking. And they're talking, and the cave divers know that, every passing 10 minutes raises the water level inside the cave at that point. And finally, one of the divers just picks up his gear and starts walking to the cave. And it's like he just started walking. And the whole group somehow thought a decision had been made. And then the other divers just picked up their gear and they walked. And if they had delayed another hour, those boys probably would have drowned. Because that's what it was. They just got in literally just barely with minutes to spare to get them out. Because at that point, that man knew further talk will not get us anywhere. This is the moment for action. God bless you, my friends.